Hello, and welcome to this episode of Rule of Carnage. This is where myself, Glenn Ford, a games designer and developer, and my good friend Mike Hutchinson, also games designer and developer, talk about designing better miniatures games. So more specifically, recently, we've been talking about redesigning miniatures games for better or for worse, or at least examining some of the elements of briefs, of tropes, of genres of miniatures games, and talking about some of the problems and advantages of like particular routes that have led to certain well-known games. And it's been fun. And today we're going to try and talk about 40k. So
That's right, Glenn. I'm hitting the hard liquor because we're going to redesign 40k.
absolutely, cheers.
Cheers. So I think so. We've both talked about a few times. There's a couple things about Warhammer 40,000 which I think are super hard design problems, and in many respects, designing a better Warhammer 40,000 is not something that any indie miniatures games designer will ever need to do.
mm,
But it's the elephant in the room. It's the thing that most of the people listening to this channel will have played at some point, and so it's a reference point for everyone. It's also something that's like incredibly central in the player base's imagination of what defines miniature games. Blah blah blah. Like it's really important to understand and figure out.
yeah.
It's one of the reasons that I spent the last few years like grinding through playing 10th edition 40k, just because I really wanted and needed to understand it better. But the two things about the game that are really hard,
Mm.
one, which I think we will spend a decent amount of time talking about, even though I'm not certain we have the answers to, which is that 360-degree line of fire, high lethality shooting
Mm.
is really hard to make work on the table and make tactically interesting. And we'll get into some of the reasons why that is, but it kind of sort of upsets some of the core affordances of the medium, if we might
Yeah.
say that. The other thing that's really hard about designing 40k is having just the insane breadth of factions and models and special abilities. Well, I said special abilities, that's a bit of a giveaway. The
Mm.
the spread of factions and models that you want to be able to feel like they have their own place in the fantasy and they have their own play style and stuff. And
Yeah.
honestly, I in no way envy the Warhammer 40,000 design team either of those problems. They've
Mm.
got some subsequent problems as well, which is that they need to create constant content releases, which
Yeah.
leads to bloat and resets and just all kinds of horrible stuff, which from a game design perspective is ghastly, but from a business perspective is essential. But
Yeah.
again, we rarely, as indie games designers, have to deal with that challenge either. But
Yeah.
to begin with the first one, like it's quite likely that we might want to deal with the challenge of high lethality, 360-degree shooting heavy
Mm.
games. Like that is your modern warfare. That's your sci-fi shooter. That's your cyberpunk shooter. Like anything beyond Wild West levels of technology, we're getting into a situation where and this even goes for like spaceship games and stuff to a degree,
Mm.
is like you kind of want a feeling where it matters that if you point a gun in a particular direction, something's probably going to die.
Mm. But it's a really horrible problem to actually make interesting and fun
Yeah,
in
so like
tabletop games.
one of the things that we talk about in the textbook, the what is it called? The Fundamentals of Tabletop Miniature Games Design, which we
Mm.
all recommend, of course, that you buy. We talk about the fact that like you've got uh the fundamental interest is the relationship between these little circles or squares that are distributed almost at random across your playing area, and the relationships that they inflict upon each other we call force projection.
Hmm.
And that force projection can be short, it can be long, it can be focused in an arc of fire, it can be 360 degrees. And the relationship between those overlapping zones, like the manipulating of those zones so that they interact in ways that are good for me but bad for you, is like just an incredibly interesting part of the spatial puzzle
Mm.
of these games. And when you get a game that allows you to be clever with the manipulation of those, and then you are clever, like you can get a lot of satisfaction from that.
Yeah.
One of the things about the current edition, on really honestly like editions of 40k since, I don't know, fifth, fourth, something, like there at one point in second edition we had 90-degree arcs of fire,
Mm.
and that meant that there was a bit of argy-bargy about exactly when you could reposition and stuff, but like miniatures had a facing and you could sneak up behind them, or they could not be facing in your direction with their heavy weapon or something.
Mm.
And so that created a situation where the shooting was very powerful, but it was pointed in a particular direction and you could avoid it.
Mm.
And obviously, like miniatures got more complicated and nobody knows wherever anyone's looking or facing or walking anymore. And so 40k now has a very 360-degree movement system and a very 360-degree like shooting like arc of fire
Mm.
system. And it's really tricky. Like I have quite high lethality shooting in A Billion Suns,
Mm.
and I give spaceships a ludicrously narrow 45-degree angle of fire out the front, like they are flying guns. And several people during the playtesting for second edition were like, Mike, this is the time when we need to stop this ridiculous modeling of flying guns in space. Like they should just like, why in the future wouldn't you have 360-degree pivoting guns and telemetry that could? And the answer is that like if I allow you to shoot in any direction, it doesn't matter where you are
Mm.
or what direction you're pointed in. Like if you've got a gun with a 48-inch range and you can shoot it in any direction, like it literally doesn't matter where on the table I place this model. But like with 40k, obviously it matters if there's a building in the way, but like this is why it's so fun in space in my spaceship game, is that there's rarely any terrain that blocks lines of sight, and so it really accentuates this problem. So I made some pretty stiff decisions about making arcs of fire quite restrictive and then making turning quite restrictive as well,
Mm.
so that the way that you point your gun and what you can point at and what you can't point at really matters. And I think that that's like, if I was going to redesign Warhammer 40,000, that's the first thing that I would address, is the fact that like the solution to making 360-degree arc of fire high lethality shooting is to not do that, because I honestly don't see a way to make that. Like you can and they have cleverly pad this out with resource systems.
Mm.
So it's had a few iterations. I think that the command point system in 10th is as good as it can be. Like I'm sure they'll iterate it a bit more, but like it's perfectly excellent. You have a menu of special abilities, there's a core menu of special abilities, and then there's a faction specific adjunct to that list of abilities. You get a resource every half a turn, and you can hoard those or you can spend them, and they are powerful abilities that allow you to manipulate the game state, and in particular save things when they get blasted off the table from halfway across. And that's fine, but it's a band-aid over the core problem.
Yeah, but what you end up doing is stacking various special rules and faction specific rules and unit specific rules, and smashing together stat lines to try and make what is not an interesting on the tabletop puzzle interesting by by stacking columns of information next to it and going, look at this column, mash this column of information into that column of information. That's interesting. Look at all the numbers hitting each other. You've got to figure out which number's best and build a thing that has that. And it's like, it's fundamentally there because the at the table interaction is just impossible to make fun and interesting and engaging.
Right.
Table.
And so you end up with these decisions made at the table which feel, not unpleasantly, but like they're more like the sort of decisions they have the brain feel of a Magic the Gathering decision rather
Mm.
than the brain feel of a miniature game decision. Because the miniature game decision, we posit is to
Mm.
do with the relationships in space of the miniatures on the table. And there is an element of that, like, okay, I've got a special ability that means that you can't shoot me from within 18 inches. So I've got to be outside of 18 inches, but my gun is 24 inches. So I need to be within a particular donut. Those are actually fairly rare, but those are fun when they happen.
Mm.
I've got some objectives that I need to be within a certain range of. So there is an element of positioning, but it's nowhere near as interesting as it can be, and it is in other games where there's more variability or there's shorter ranges. Um,
Yeah, I mean, games are about interesting and often interesting because difficult decisions. The Sid Meier quote or whatever
mm,
it was is that, a game is a series of interesting decisions. And long, a game where you've got ubiquitous 360-degree, quite long range weapons that are reasonably lethal against almost all of the other things that are on the table is a game that just really struggles to generate interesting decisions about where you're going to move any given guy, because it's like pretty much wherever he is, there's an extremely target rich environment, all of which are it's effective shooting at any one of these like 10 different things, and the decision is it's a priority matrix of just going what has to die first, and then looking at the list every time it's time to do your shooting, you know, and the game revolves around that shooting. So it's just incredibly hard to make that relationship just interesting, fun, engaging, like
so
worth
so there's
looking at.
yeah, so there's another avenue of solutioning here, which is like one of the things that could make it more interesting is if there was a reaction system or if there was some kind of play and counterplay. And this is where I think that, we're not going to go deep, I think, into the activation system debate on 40K, but like one of the weakest elements of 40K is that the I go, you go system means that there is very little reactive interplay between one unit's movement and another unit's ability. And like, we're dealing with like, a high future battlefield. Everyone's got laser guns and, stuff that can shoot really fast and hit things. And a game like Infinity takes that problem and puts it very centrally to the
Mm,
system. And again, here command points come in as a band-aid. And so there are like the key to like, oh, as a player, you have something to do in every phase, even your opponent's phase, is that like each phase has some kind of potential resource spend if you haven't already spent your one command point on doing something else, which is that like, if you move, I can snap fire. If you charge me, I can decide to charge you or fight first or something. And so there's a little element, a little taste of like, wouldn't it be nice if you had a rich way of reacting to things? But it's very limited, and because command points are quite they're quite they're handed out very slowly. You only get one every half a turn.
mm.
You don't get many of these decisions, and you can argue, well, that makes the decision very, very, exquisitely difficult, and you've got to, really pick your moment. Fine, that's not my experience. What I think is more interesting would be to see a Warhammer 40,000 which has a richer and kind of more emergent reactive fire system. So again, the way that I solved this in A Billion Suns is with passive fire and having a different zone of fire and a different set of ranges for a unit's passive fire. And I can do this within the fantasy of spaceship games because like imagining a giant gun that shoots a long way and then having a bunch of point defenses that are like laser turrets that shoot the little craplets that are trying to attack you and stuff. Like you can imagine the fantasy of that. And so
Mm.
you can have like a set of auxiliary weapons which shoot automatically, and then a big primary weapon that shoots only when it's your turn to shoot.
The thing is that's difficult again about 40K is that it exacerbates this problem by being a massed battle game, because
Mm.
Infinity does a really good job of dealing with the high lethality, high range 360-degree sort of shooting problem, but it does it because it has very few models on the tabletop, and so I can legitimately move a particular miniature and maintain cover from all opponents at all times. In 40K, it's like I'm always going to be able to see one of your guys because you've got so many guys. And always when I move, one of your guys is going to be able to see me because you've got so many guys. There's
Mm.
no sort of like complete cover that you can achieve. There's too many miniatures on the tabletop to make many of those solutions work for 40k because it's also massed battle. It's not just that these ranges are very long, it's that there's an absolute blanket of the buggers, just
Well, and this is actually,
tabletop.
I think this is maybe the subtlest problem with designing Warhammer 40,000, which is that the actual tabletop experience makes no sense.
Hmm.
And like we all know that, and we just look the other way. But like that array of massed forces in a fantasy setting, it's fine. We're having like a rank and flank battle. They've got to get up and close and they've got to be able to kick each other's shins before you can
Yeah.
do any real damage. Like playing epic 40,000,
Hmm.
okay, fine. Like we can see there's like maybe half a mile across the table here. Like maybe the units are a little zoomed in, but we can see they're a little, there's a little town over there, there's a little town over here, there's a road going across. Like, it's pretty close, but like we're having a big battle across like a valley or something. This, like, I don't know, like they just opened the doors to like the Black Friday sale and everyone's just charged into the shopping mall and you can like rah, 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 except we're using like artillery from like 3 meters away for some reason. Like
Yeah, and
that's the fundamental problem is that it's really hard to come up with a system that evokes the fantasy because the fantasy is fundamentally broken.
yeah, and this is because, like, World War II games have a weird sigma curve applied to actual real world ranges to make them work on a 6x4 tabletop.
Mhm.
And then World War II games have just been translated into space and become 40k. So it has these similar sort of stupid, sort of flattened out ranges amongst weapons where it's like, the weapons all have ranges that are far too short actually for the sort of weapon they are, and far too long for the interest of the game that you're playing, and and weaponry that makes no sense that you got to this distance between each other before anybody got shot by anything. It's like
Mm.
this thing can fire like 10 miles. How have I not obliterated all of these guys before we got to this? This is the point where one of our forces should be wiped out, and one guy should just be walking in and claiming the thing that's been fought over. The idea that I've got some sort of hyper laser and I'm at a point where I can actually see your actual face before shooting at it with this hyper laser, it's mind-blowingly
Well,
ridiculous.
and so this is like, we're skipping through a lot of different topics here, but like,
Hmm.
my God, this is a hard game to
Yeah.
design. Like, this is where I think cover and terrain become so interesting. And like, almost thinking back to like the discussion about Trench Crusade not really having any trenches in it, or not in a way that you would sort of connect directly to the rules. Like, you can imagine a bit like in what am I thinking of, like Gears of War or something.
Hmm.
Like maybe what's going on here is that like terrain is incredibly powerful, and like what we're doing is that we're an incredibly crushed battle line. Like we're in a very like what's the word I'm looking for, like it's we're in a strong defensive position. Like we've set up, maybe I'm in my defensive position, you're invading into it. Like I've been playing the Space Marine 2 video game recently. Like you're in a very, you tend to be in like a Imperial Guard camp with like barbed wire and big concrete things everywhere. The Tyranids then pour over the walls. You get a minute to like shoot them as they're trying to climb up the walls, but then you're fighting in amongst very dense terrain. Terrain is treated as terrain has always been treated in Games Workshop games, which is it's -1 to hit, or it's a
Hmm.
+1 to your save, or whatever. And the thing is, I think that like terrain becomes something which should have cast shadows
Hmm.
that create the interest that the arcs of fire cannot. So if it's impossible to target somebody in terrain, okay, that seems a bit weird, but actually that might create an incredibly interesting set of dynamics where, oh, okay, so I literally can't target you in terrain. What does that mean for the game? What does that do? That creates this kind of different force projection, where like I can manipulate your force projection by my movement. Okay, now that's got something much more interesting, rather than just being like, well, as long as I can see you a bit, like I just have to weight of dice you, and I will weight of dice you eventually.
Yeah, and it's, the elephant in the room is that obviously 40k has concerns other than being a great tabletop game. And for a long time, terrain wasn't something that was particularly made and sold. And when they did do things like the there's that bastion thing where you could actually
Mm.
pay points for it and take it, and that son of a bitch turned up every single time somebody could take it, because good terrain is incredibly powerful in a game with high lethality, 360-degree, blah 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 shooting. And so it's like terrain, can't be championed, because by and large what's meant to happen is you're meant to go and make your own terrain, or
Hmm.
or get it from a third party supplier. And so the game kind of can't be about it. And also it's like terrain, what terrain does is it gets in the way of you being able to look at the beautiful miniatures, which are the point of the game. And it makes moving the beautiful miniatures fiddly and annoying. And why is this miniature sticky out like this? I hate this miniature, I'll never buy
Hmm.
another one of these again. So we're
Hmm.
not going to have terrain be like a very important part of the game, because it makes people not want to buy their plastic crackers, vociferously as they do. And I know that that's like sort of, yeah, but that's not a game design problem. And if you were a game designer, you would just be going, screw you, this is what will make the game better. But
Yeah.
that is why these things don't exist within this particular game, because you know there are meta concerns in designing 40k. And like, as you were saying, the churn that the game has to supply is in many ways not a game design problem, but it's clearly a problem that game designer somewhere is having to
To
deal
deal
with.
with. Yeah.
And the like you say, the breadth of the armies and the depth of the you know units and
Well,
profiles.
and it comes out in at least two or three different ways. One is the system has to have sufficient granularity to support that breadth.
Mm,
And yet they want the game to be very approachable and easy. So the core system has to be simple, which means you have to put all the complexity in the special rules. And that
yeah.
has this whole other, particularly when it's a pay to access the rules model, it becomes a very, very difficult proposition.
Mm,
But like maybe with a few extra core systems, little bit more granularity, maybe the game would actually be more readable because there would be more knobs for factions to fiddle with.
yeah.
And so it wouldn't necessarily be absolutely as simple that first time you play, but the third and fifth time you played, it might be that like, oh, I don't have to learn like an arbitrary list of dictionary definitions.
Yeah, it would become a game that will get easier to play each time you play it, rather than harder to play each time you play it. At the
Right.
moment, it's a game that's very easy to play the first time you play it, because the rule book's quite simple, and you probably understand the forces that came in whatever two-player starter box set you bought. And then the next time you play it, you're playing some person's random army that you don't understand the rules of. And then the third time you play it, you understand that it's important you understand the rules of the random person you've got. And so it just gets
And
more.
then you realize there are 22 of these books that you need to memorize.
Yeah, so it gets more. Whereas if there were more interactions and granularity in the core system, it'd be harder the first time you played it. But by the time you got to like the fourth or fifth time, you would know pretty much what any army could do, because what they can do is twiddle one of those granular systems that are in the core system. And all those systems. So they're only going to be able to turn that one up or that one down or pull that one inside out, rather than
Mm.
just go, I can just do something that isn't in the core rule book, suck it, find out what that feels like.
Another manifestation of this breadth problem is the Imperial Knights versus Orcs problem, where it's like there's just so much variation in the number of miniatures, the number of units, the number of activations, the density of wounds versus saving throws. Like, when I'm designing a game, I'm not creating that problem for myself. Like, why
Mm.
would I do that to myself? Like
Yeah, no,
having to
yeah.
create a situation where like a 10 like a 10-mile high space robot can fight against like the concept of ennui, and somehow that can be balanced.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, if you're designing a game for yourself, it's like I'd like the variation between models on each side to be between 5 and 8.
Yeah,
That's great. I love that. That's brilliant. I can
yeah,
pretty much playtest the hell out of that and know how everything's going to work. Going, I'd like the variation of numbers to be all numbers, including minus numbers and imaginary
right.
numbers. That's going to be brilliant fun to balance that sucker out. Um, yeah, it's like you say, I don't envy anybody having to make the behemoth that is 40k work, and I agree that the short answer to anybody thinking of designing their own game is don't don't design your own version of 40k. It has a lot of really in you know impossibly difficult problems that are built in by a combination of the necessity of a business and the necessity of staying true to ideas that are now a generation old. It's still got to be 40k. It's still basically got to sort of be the same number of models, and you've got to pay out all of the favorite armies that somebody collected 30 years ago and wants to see on the tabletop again. So,
Mm.
they're absolutely, shackled to a huge number of very, very significant problems that are really, really difficult to solve well. And if you have any sense at all and you don't hate yourself, you won't choose to have any of those problems, to then try and fix them. And it's
I mean, look, because like it's often that people ask me like, when are you going to make like a Hobgoblin 40,000? Like, when can we have a kind of Hobgoblin design philosophy version of me playing with my toy soldiers? And obviously, like, one-page rules exist, and Grimdark Firefight is a thing that people turn to because they want to have a lighter experience. But like, this is the reason why I haven't put together a 40 like a hobgoblin in the future, is that like I've wrestled with this for like nearly 5 years, and probably before that, but like as soon as I knew that I was properly working on hobgoblin, I started thinking about this. And when I come up with an answer, maybe I'll put a game together, but it's just really hard.
Well, I mean, the thing is that if the ethos of Hobgoblin is, a relatively short list of special rules that everybody has access to, which is what gives flavor to your armies, that is simply insufficient to make the 360-degree blah 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 elements interesting. What Because Hobgoblin has to make rank and flank inertial movement, which is inherently,
Inertial movement, like melee focused, deliberately downplayed shooting.
yeah, those things, that is interesting in and of itself. So the unit thing is like a special source that makes an interesting thing.
And like, we haven't even talked about the fact that like, god damn it, like an army in Warhammer 40,000 is like 30 to 80 individual models. Sure, they're in units, but like a hobgoblin army is 8 to
Mm,
10 models, just the same as a skirmish game is 8 to 10 models. Like, that's easy. Like, you can do interesting things with the relationships between those 8 to 10 things. Like, that's a fun number of things. Like,
mm,
having to move and also manage the relationships between 80 things on the table, like,
yeah.
it's hot garbage.
Yeah, and also we haven't even talked about the first turn player problem. That if I can shoot any of your stuff and all of my stuff kills things, and I get turn one, I'm going to erase a
Yeah,
significant.
that's like one of the frustrations with my life, is that I haven't managed to get anybody to play Warhammer 40,000 Apocalypse, the 2019 version. Because like, I think that of all the games that they've released that look like 40k looks like the best one to me because it solves this problem up, down, and sideways without any arguments at all. It still has to deal with all of the variations, but because it's zoomed out, it does it almost at like a hobgoblin level of granularity. But
Mm.
you're right, like that is, that's why people like the alternative activation system of one page rules, Grimdark, Firefight, or whatever. And people will say, well, of course, like the only solution to 40k is alternating activations because you don't get the Alpha Strike problem. We both know that there's plenty of other ways to solve Alpha Strike, but it is obviously a big old hairy problem, particularly if you've got high lethality 360-degree long range shooting.
Yeah, it is. It's a mass of interlocking problems. It's like you can solve one of these problems by doing something, but that other thing is not what would not be 40k. It's like the things that define 40k are all problems that jab into each other with hooks and make every one of the other problems even more sort of bloody and unpleasant. And it is just like pulling one of them out is like, well, you can't fix that one because he's dragging this one with it, and then that's dragging that one with it, and you're just, it's turtles all the way down. It's an absolute, it's a horror show.
It's a
And
beast. It's a beast.
yeah, yeah, and it's like I think you can do 360-degree high lethality shooting interestingly. Infinity's proved that. You can do mass battle games interestingly. 100 different things have proved that. You can do, I go, you go interestingly. That's been shown. All three of those things together, each of them is destroying the solution that you would use to make the other one interesting.
Yeah, and then you layer on top of that, like it has to be simple, but it has to support 8,000 models.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So
Anyway, good luck to him. If anybody from the Warhammer 40,000 design studio happens to listen to Rule of Carnage, I hope you do. Like, my heart goes out to you, honestly,
yeah,
like
I
genuinely, and like professional solidarity. Like, what a hell of a job.
yeah,
Keep
no,
keep keep on keeping on.
yeah, no, I hear people have a go at like the 40k rule system, and I always try to say like, I mean, what it is doing, it is the best version of it. It's You don't understand how unbelievably difficult that game is to put together and not just fall apart immediately and be completely and utterly unpleasant and unplayable. So it's like, they know what they're doing. Like, the designers who are working on it are, I think, good designers. It's just
Just a hard problem.
it's just
So, if you are considering redesigning your own Warhammer 40,000 equivalent, I mean, by all means, have a go.
yeah, no,
I'm gonna have
absolutely.
a go. Like, I mean, I'm still gonna have a go.
At some point or another. And I tell you what, look, which of we've done series of videos on cursed problems. What is interesting about 40k is that it is an interlocking set of cursed problems. Which one of them would you take out in favor of fixing the other ones?
Yeah.
I mean, if you are a prodigy and you can fix all of them simultaneously and
Keep it to
accurately,
yourself. Yeah.
well, yeah, tell us because then we can rip that off. I would suggest keeping it secret. But which of the problems do you think is most ejectable from the rolling death cradle that is the 40k design challenge? Why do you think that is the one that is not, um, you know, inherent to the flavor of the game? I suspect a lot of the time the answer there will be the activation system, but I know I think maybe otherwise. If you have designed a game in a similar vein, please tell us about it in the comment section. If you have opinions about how well designed 40k is or is not, and how splendid the people trying to deal with that problem are or are not, also drop that into the comment section. While you're down there flaming the 40k designers, hit us the like and
Keep it
subscribe.
nice, lads. Keep it nice.
hit 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 the like and
Hit this like
sorry,
and subscribe button
hit the like
because
and
we
subscribe
need
buttons because
we
we
need
need
Google
those.
to know.
Check out the links section. There'll be a link across there to our Discord, where if you want to flame 40k, there are people who will join in wholeheartedly with you.
And do it in private,
Shoulder to shoulder like
in a
brothers.
professional environment.
Check out the links to our Patreons, where you can swing by and support the channel directly. Check out links to various places where you
in fact, I'm going to be adding a new tier to my Patreon, which is a $5,000 a month. If you want me to design a replacement 40k, I will do that for that.
That's a dangerous risk to take, because I don't think
yeah, but I immediately reconsidering this.
Yeah, I would need a lot more than $5,000 to do that. Yeah, check out the links to the various places where you can buy various games where we have not put ourselves through the torment of redesigning 40k, but have designed some of the problems of it into different shapes, like A Billion Suns and such like.
I mean, I've designed the solutions. I haven't designed the problems.
But for now, I think from this episode and this sort of carnage, it's going to be a thank and goodbye. So
goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Ciao, ciao.